Hi Dennis, as promised I'm doing a video book report on Bell Hooks' Teaching Community Pedagogy of Hope. So I liked how she was really honest in her book. I liked how she included her experience in her book. That allowed me to relate a little bit more to the book. I liked how she spoke from a black female in higher education perspective voice. As coming from a black female in higher education myself, I think this was a great book to read. Her experiences, helped me, I guess, add more meaning to mine and why I went through certain things. So she kind of just dived right into the dominant, teaching curricula in higher education, how it favors the imperialist, white supremacist, capitalist, and patriarchal values, how that leaves out the black voice, how that leaves out the feminine voice, and how it's just very one track minded, I guess. She, encourages students and educators, teachers to challenge that framework, to challenge that way of thinking, to be more inclusive, to include everybody in the learning experience. She touched bases on how, the media has encouraged parents and students that alternative ways of thinking, alternative ways of learning should, be stayed away from, and that goes against the grain of everything we learned about in class this quarter. She also talked about teaching in an authoritarian attitude or authoritarian persona, I guess to say. She spoke against it and how that's not conducive to learning in the classroom, how that, I guess, makes students afraid to speak out, how that makes students not want to challenge what's being taught in the classroom. And she also said that teaching should be a democracy and not a dictatorship. It shouldn't just be one person, the professor or the teacher, leading the discussion. It should be a group thing. Students should be involved, they should be engaged, they should be proactive in their learning process, they should speak out, and think for themselves. So one of my favorite things that Bell Hooks said in the book in chapter 4, page 41, when teachers support democratic education, we automatically support widespread literacy. So this to me means that everybody is a part of the learning process. This doesn't leave anyone behind. Everyone can engage and be a part of the classroom experience. Everyone is like on one track and is involved in the learning process. In her book, Bell Hooks also promotes diversity in the classroom, engaging with students that do not look like you, are not from, the same background that you're from, and may not even know the same things that you may know. So this allows inclusivity. It allows students of different backgrounds to be engaged in the classroom and to not feel left out, which is actually a common thing in higher education. And inclusivity is something that we've kind of touched on throughout the course. What I also like about the book is how she went right into the civil rights movement and the feminist movement, and how they were both crucial in providing a diverse perspective in higher education for students of minority backgrounds and female students and female professors and female educators. And as much as Bell Hooks encourages students to challenge what is taught in the classroom, more specifically to challenge dominant teachings and frameworks, she gave a little bit of background as to why students usually don't challenge what they're taught. On page 86 in chapter 7, she stated, subordinated by a hierarchical system that indoctrinates students early on, letting them know that their success depends on their capacity to obey. Most students fear questioning anything about the way their classrooms are structured. So that just goes to say, through grade school, K through 12, students were just fed all of this knowledge and they weren't necessarily a part of their own learning process. So now they get to higher ed and it's like, well, I'm just going to take what the professor is telling me. And she definitely advises against that and wants students to be a part of their own learning process and to ask questions and be proactive in the classroom, I guess, instead of reactive. And I think that's a great way of allowing students to learn in a way that they're more comfortable with. I guess it engages students in what they're learning and they're not necessarily just being fed knowledge. So instead of five sources, I used six. I think six, well, the six that I chose were very relevant to the Bell Hooks book. And it was the Armenio article, which is the professionalization of student learning practice and ethos of scholarship. I used the Marcia Baxter Magolda article, Identity in Learning, Student Affairs Role in Transforming Higher Education. I then used the Kazar article, Organizational Models and Facilitators of Change, providing a framework for student and academic affairs collaboration. I used the Kolb and Kolb article, Learning Styles and Learning Spaces, Enhancing Experiential Learning in Higher Education. I used the K article, Guiding Principles for Creating Seamless Learning Environments for Undergraduates. And I then used the Watts article, Courage in Multicultural Initiatives. I chose those six specific articles because they all talked about collaboration, engagement on the student part, and different learning styles that would allow students to be successful in the classroom. Armenio talked about faculty and staff uniting to foster student development and student learning. In her article, Identity in Learning, Marcia Baxter Magolda stated that intercultural competence is a part of the college experience and it aids in respecting diverse perspectives. So this relates to the diversity discussion that Bell Hooks was having in her book about how, minority students who come from different backgrounds need to be accepted in the classroom. They must be engaged in the classroom, and more importantly, they must be involved, in the conversation and various dialogues that go on in the classroom in order for them to learn just like everybody else. So professors and educators, they must be culturally competent. Students must be culturally competent, and I really don't see a classroom working unless those things are in play. So what ties all of these articles together is that they all talk about the quality of learning inside and outside of the classroom, how there's a community outside of the classroom and not just inside the classroom, and how students should be allowed to, if not be in control, at least be a part of the process of their own learning. So out of the six articles that I chose to use for the Bell Hooks book was the K article, Guiding Principles for Creating Seamless Learning Environments for Undergraduates. I think this article was the most relevant. I think it was the most relative. And it definitely talked about collaboration more than any other article. It definitely talked about having one vision, so having a unified vision, having an idea that everyone shared, and having common language, within the university. I feel like having everyone on the same page encourages a positive learning environment, encourages a positive learning community inside and outside of the classroom. So after reading Bell Hooks' book, I was able to come up with 5 practical suggestions to apply. And the first one would be spirituality, encouraging students to develop a spiritual identity and explain to them the difference between spiritual and religious. I guess it helps. It definitely helps. I think spiritual is more so a personal, inner thing that you would want to work on. And religion is definitely a group setting, a community thing that you would attend however many times you would choose to. And Bell Hooks gave a really great response to this in chapter 15, Spiritual Matters in the Classroom. She stated, "Religion I take to be concerned with faith in the claims to salvation of one faith tradition or another, an aspect of which is acceptance of some form of metaphysical or supernatural reality, including perhaps an idea of heaven or nirvana. Connected with this are religious teachings or dogma, ritual prayer, and so on. Spirituality I take to be concerned with those qualities of the human spirit, such as love and compassion, patience, tolerance, forgiveness, contentment, a sense of responsibility, a sense of harmony, which brings happiness to both self and others, while ritual and prayer, along with the questions of nirvana and salvation, are directly connected to religious faith. These inner qualities need not be, however, inner qualities. So there is thus no reason why the individual should not develop them, even to a high degree, without recourse to any religious or metaphysical belief system. This is why I sometimes say that religion is something we can perhaps do without. What we cannot do without are these basic spiritual qualities." The second practical suggestion that I have, it piggybacks off of what Bell Hooks already talked about, which is to encourage students to be proactive in their learning, allow them to be engaged, and help them challenge, or at least encourage them to challenge the ideas and the theories that they are learning inside of the classroom. So, the third suggestion that I have is to encourage pluralism and inclusivity. And Bell Hooks talked about that a little bit in chapter 4 of her book. And she stated that pluralism is something that we commit to. We commit to engage with the other person or the other community. It's a commitment to communicate with and relate to the larger world with a very different neighbor or a distant community. It's not the same as diversity. Diversity is something that exists. It's just differences in one place. Pluralism is accepting that difference and engaging with that difference. And like I said earlier, that is necessary for minority students to feel accepted inside of the classroom and for them to be active in their learning process. Suggestion number 4 is definitely relevant to suggestion number 2, which is to challenge and change dominant models of education. And I think this more so lies as a responsibility for educators and for staff, is to change those models that we have been using for years in higher education to incorporate the female voice and the minority voice and just make everyone feel, included in higher education, to let them know that their history and their experience is important. And last but not least, the fifth suggestion that I have to make would be to support students of color, support female students, and most importantly, support first generational students. They usually have no idea of what it means to exist in higher education. They're usually minority students, so they may not know how to navigate higher education. They may not take advantage of professors' office hours. They may not necessarily know who to talk to in financial aid, and they may feel left out in the classroom of like 200 to 300 students. So they are the ones that are not challenging ideas and not challenging theories. And what me and Bell Hooks have in common is that we are African American women in higher education. So support is very important for us. So that will conclude my book report on Bell Hooks' Teaching Community, A Pedagogy of Hope. I hope that you liked it, and I really do hope that it was informative. If you've never read the book, I think it was a great read. So I would suggest maybe that you put it in next year's syllabus. It definitely is relevant to the other articles that you had in the syllabus, and I'm sure it would flow just as well. So I'll see you soon.